I'm Catherine Arndt, the Chief of the VLGA Connect Studio. Welcome to today's episode, brought to you by the VLGA, your counsellor support network and the national broadcaster on all things local government.
Hello everyone and welcome along to VLGA Connect. It's Friday. Well, it's Friday as we record this. Could be any other day when you're watching it, but it's TGU time and Tony Raunic is with me from Hunt & Hunt Lawyers, our sponsors of TGU. G'day, Tony.
Oh, g'day, Chris. And people might watch it several times, Chris, initially
on
Friday and again on Monday and Tuesday.
That would explain the YouTube viewing numbers. There's, I think, 3 people that watch it about 90 times. Yeah.
True.
It's a theory anyway. Big week this week. Julie Reid still tripping around the UK, and we'll have some evidence of that a little later in the program. So I know Julie's been keeping up to date from over there. So hi, Julie. And of course, huge week, and Julie's probably feeling a bit left out because this week, significant statements and announcements made that will affect the sector in terms of housing and planning. How are we going to do this, Tony? There's so much in this, isn't there?
Yeah, and we can't take up the whole show with the housing statement. We don't want to do that because there's other things going on in the sector this week, but clearly a really significant document. So we will certainly give you some links to go and have a look at the detail of the statement and perhaps concentrate a little on some of the responses in the sector, Chris, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. Look, the key things are the housing statement, the target of, 800,000 homes over 10 years, which people are wondering, well, how is that going to be possible? The devil's in the detail. And of course, the local government sector, particularly concerned about the planning system changes that have been flagged. Not only flagged, we'll get to this, Tony, some of them already being brought in. The short stay levy that's going to apply across the state, that's a first in Australia. And of course, that's got implications for some councils that have already introduced their own measures in that respect. But a couple of things that were sort of a bit hidden away, Tony, and we might just focus on those for a moment. The Planning and Environment Act, a complete
the
rewrite.
Very last paragraph on the very last page of any content was, I think, perhaps one of the really critical elements for the sector, in that the government foreshadowed that they would be undertaking a review of the Planning and Environment Act, that 1987 piece of legislation, and that the review would look at what the role of councils, the Minister for Planning, and other entities would be going forward. So I think that, that inclusion of that statement and foreshadowing that review won't allay the fears that there are, really across the sector about, potential loss of, local community involvement in planning decisions through the role of councils and councillors as being a part of that process. And we know from a subsequent statement yesterday from the government that that they'll be making some announcements about the time frame of those Planning and Environment Act reforms over forthcoming months. So we might be seeing some activity fairly soon.
Yeah, so they have said a complete rewrite. So I think most people probably welcome that. It needs to be fit for purpose. The other thing is Plan Melbourne will no longer be Plan Melbourne. We're going to have a new statewide planning strategy. I think most people are recognising that's probably needed as well. A bit of a focus on regional Victoria through the statements. We might deal with a bit of response to this first, Tony. The short stay levy, which is going to be 7.5% and apparently raise, what was it, $70 million, I think.
Alta Homes Victoria.
Yes, with 25% of that going to be invested in regional Victoria. Regional mayors pretty much are all saying the money that's raised in our municipalities, at least, should all be coming back into this municipality, and 25% is not enough.
I did see those statements, and some of those regional communities are particularly affected by this short stay accommodation. Chris, I didn't realise, but I saw a statistic that about half of Victoria's short stay accommodation is actually located in the regions.
That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It would make sense because people travel there. But, statements from people like Brian Hood, the mayor at Hepburn, and of course the real focus for, weekender type accommodation, etc., saying, we want 20, we want all the we don't want 25% of the revenue that's collected. We want what's collected from our municipality to be invested back in our municipality. Similar statements from Debbie Arnott, the mayor at Warrnambool City Council. And then an interesting statement I thought from the mayor at Bass Coast, Michael Whelan, who said, look, unfortunately, with the statewide levy, it's nullified those local council initiatives. And at Bass Coast, in introducing a local short stay accommodation levy, they were also, through the local law, bringing in some controls that dealt with, proper management of waste, neighbourhood amenity, making sure that there's a sufficient standard of accommodation provided. And those sort of controls now slip away, and there doesn't seem to be any accompanying sort of controls with the statewide levy. So, an opportunity potentially lost there.
So that reaction's been wrapped up in a report from ABC, which we'll pop the link to that in the show notes. The broader sector response, the MAV put out 2 releases in one day, actually, Tony. The first one was very much, we welcome the announcement, the clarity, let's work on this and move forward together, with some comments from Jennifer Anderson, one of the regional councillors on the board. Later in the day, when it became clear that some changes, I think, had already been gazetted and nobody realised this was coming, therefore, lack of consultation, the tone from the MAV's second response was a little different, wasn't it?
Yes, absolutely, and understandable, I think. So Joseph Haweel, Councillor Haweel, is MAV Deputy President, in a statement said, communities will be concerned, that the minister has gone and removed these, or the minister has an ability, Minister for Planning will have an ability to, in terms of access to the Development Facilitation Fund, to actually have discretion to ignore some of that announced criteria about 10% affordable housing and etc., and just exercise her discretion to allow certain developments to go through this streamlined process, which takes out third-party rights, takes out review rights, etc. So, he makes a statement that there ought to be clear guidelines in terms of the minister exercising that broader discretion. And on behalf of the MAV, Joseph Haweel also says that, one thing we've learned from Operation Sandon is that what we need is more transparency. We need more guidelines for decision making, not this kind of broad this discretion and a lack of understanding as to why certain decisions are being made. So yes, I think a strong reaction from the MAV there, in particular in that second statement.
Yeah, I thought that was a telling comment that, potentially these changes could lead to less transparency rather than more, which is something we certainly don't want to see, Tony. So that's the MAV. Their responses are obviously widely available online as well. There was a follow-up press release from the state government that came out yesterday. Just looking to bring this up. Yes, it came out yesterday morning, headed "Good Decisions Made Faster." And I thought it was just an encapsulation of the stuff that they'd put on the website, but it actually went a bit further in that it's taken a bit of a swipe. A couple of councils in particular, Yarra and Stonnington. One of the things here that seems lost in the government's argument, Tony, is the MAV's analysis says there's about 120,000 granted permits out there that haven't been acted on. So the problem is not resting with councils approving applications, yet the government still wants to whack Yarra, saying they've only progressed 38% of applications within a required time frame, and Stonnington saying they've rejected 1 in 5 almost of planning permit applications. as the justification for these changes to the system, but it's not washing with those councils and a lot of others in the sector, is it?
Not at all, and fairly, I think, simplistic statements. Some selective statistics. Premier saying things like, the system just isn't working like it should, and decisions aren't being made fast enough. You pointed out, they say that only 38% of applications in the city of Yarra were progressed in the statutory 60 days. Well, Yarra has responded and saying, look, firstly, City of Yarra fundamentally believes that improved planning outcomes result when there's community input into the planning process. And I think most of us listening would heartily agree with that. But they've also pointed out that, in fact, over the last financial year, City of Yarra has done, as they say, much of the heavy lifting in relation to housing supply, in that about 10% of the new dwellings across Greater Melbourne are in the City of Yarra. And in fact, 98% of planning permits applications they've received were approved. And in terms of the time frame that decisions are made, Yarra have pointed out that the sector broadly, for many, many years, has been advocating that the statutory time frame for processing planning permit applications is far too short in this complicated world we have of planning, particularly these more detailed planning applications that deliver volume housing supply. And interestingly, as City of Yarra has pointed out, seems that the Minister for Planning, despite all the protestations here, believes that as well, because the time frame that the Minister for Planning has been given to process applications under the Development Facilitation Program is 120 days. Yeah. So it's twice as long as they're giving councils and complaining that councils aren't meeting. So, there does seem to be some inconsistency in the government's position on this.
And I think I heard the opposition leader make a similar point yesterday that, in his view, the government's the worst offender in terms of the timing of those processes. Stonnington also got a bit of a whack, Tony. They've responded also.
Yeah. So, as I say, the Premier's office said that 1 in 5 planning permit applications at Stonnington were being rejected. So that would be 20%. So quite a high proportion, if you believe what the Premier's office is saying. But in fact, on immediate statement on Council's website indicates that in the last 2 financial years, they processed 3,097 planning permit applications and 65 were refused. That's 2% of the applications were refused. So, there's clearly quite a difference in the figures coming out of the state government versus Stonnington City Council. And one would think Stonnington knows how many applications it processes. And also, I just think it's a poor measure of performance to say, a certain number are rejected. Well, perhaps a certain number of applications weren't appropriate. Perhaps a certain number, needed to be sent back for modification and initially rejected. That's why we have community involvement in the process. And if the solution is to take the community out of the process, what do we lose? I think we lose the fundamentals.
So they seem stuck on this figure of a backlog of 1,400 housing permit applications stuck with councils for more than 6 months. There's been no reaction to the data that suggests 120,000 already approved, not acted on. I think it remains to be seen how they think they're going to be able to deliver 80,000 homes a year without some more significant changes, particularly at the construction end.
Well, that's right. I think as we've seen other entities point out, I think the Inner South Metropolitan Mayors Forum, so covering Bayside, Boroondara, Glenora and Kingston, they prior to this announcement, but certainly over the past week or so, have publicly released a letter they wrote to the Minister for Planning and expressing the concerns about this clear intent to seemingly, erode, this strength of the planning scheme in terms of the involvement of local councils, but, also, pointing out that local government's really best placed to deliver on these expectations of the Planning and Environment Act.
And Tony, that letter also points out, as a few have around the sector, that if these changes are about responding to Operation Sandon, and I noticed none of the material this week has made the link. Have you noticed that? If it has somewhere, I've missed it. But it does make the point that everyone agrees those issues need to be addressed. But the experience at Casey was an anomaly, not the norm, as it says in the letter, and shouldn't be used as an excuse to strip councils of their ability to influence local planning decisions.
Yeah. That's right. And as you said before, Chris, in terms of that there's an issue in terms of delivery of housing supply after it's been approved. And you mentioned the 120,000 approved dwellings that haven't been delivered by developers. Jennifer Anderson, also from the MAV, Councillor Jennifer Anderson, in a statement, points out that, what might need to occur in order to deliver greater housing supply is a change to the incentivisation in the private sector, in the development sector. They're for whatever reason, developers are holding back on pursuing developments even when they have planning approvals. That might be to kind of restrict supply and build up prices. It might be because, there's a difficulty in getting materials, in getting access to the qualified employees to build these projects. But the government needs to look at that if they're going to fix things. And this idea that will sell off 45, I think it was, government-owned sites in Victoria to private developers to get them to do the developments and deliver housing supply, well, they'll need to find a way to incentivise the delivery of that supply, not just the approval of the permit process.
I want to read just some quotes, Tony, and I want you to see if you can tell where it's come from. The peak body representing blank has called on the state government to help support the building sector to activate almost, insert figure, residential lots already approved statewide. Councils have been doing the right thing and progressing development approval applications in a timely way, but there are almost, insert number, development approvals lying dormant because rising construction costs and labour shortages are impacting the viability to proceed. Where do you think that statement might have been made this week?
What's coming out? Is coming out of the development sector somewhere, has it?
It's come out of Queensland.
You
can update the number, you can change the state, you can change the names of the players. It's exactly the same situation. That was LGAQ in Queensland calling on the government to do more to get things actually built because councils are doing their part. Same thing in New South Wales, same thing in Victoria. Kudos to the Victorian state government, I think, for thinking outside the box and coming up with some different levers and different options here. But please don't leave councils and communities behind in trying to fix the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a national phenomenon, as you say, but lots of work at councils across the state now in pulling apart the detail of this housing statement. There's 10 activity centres identified across Melbourne for clear planning controls, whatever that is going to mean. But there's a whole batch of councils, Hume for Broadmeadows, Burundara for Camberwell, Monash for Chadstone, Whittlesea for Epping, Frankston, Moorabbin, so Kingston Council, Moonee Valley with Niddrie and North Essendon, and Ringwood with Maroondah, who will be thinking, what does it mean for those activity centres? Are they going to be, are they going to look like Doncaster or Box Hill?
You did very well there. You did very well matching those activity centres with the councils off the cuff, but you missed one, Tony. I'm sorry. I'm only going to give you 9 out of 10. You missed Preston.
I missed Preston. Well, that would be Darebin.
Spot on. Well done. Okay, so because there was a lot of conjecture about what those priority precincts would be before the announcement this week. Those are the 10. A couple of other little things before we move on. The Red Tape Commissioner's Review, which goes back, a couple of years now, 3, 4, maybe more, made a number of recommendations for red tape reform. They've been picked up and apparently are going to be implemented. That was buried in the details somewhere. And this is an interesting one, Tony. So the Department of Transport and Planning are going to bring on 90 new planners to speed things up and help clear the backlog. Everyone is asking, myself included, where are those 90 planners going to come from? And might they come from councils, just exacerbating the problem that councils already have finding qualified planners?
Yeah, that would definitely be the concern if that's the intent, to just broadly advertise and attract planners from councils. It would just exacerbate an existing problem, won't it?
All right, really keen to hear people's thoughts and reactions. Engage with us on the socials, send us an email. We will follow up next week if there's any particular points that we haven't covered or you'd like to see covered or get responses to. Anything else you want to say about this one before we draw a line under it for now, Tony?
There's so much there, but encourage you to look at our statements. I put something out on LinkedIn, and know others. There's a lot of detail there. What we haven't covered today are things like the deemed to comply provisions, the Future Homes program. If you want to know about that, talk to someone from the city of Maribyrnong. That program's been applying there, and it's about to be rolled out across every general residential zone. And we haven't talked about the public housing towers across Melbourne that will be, converted into private and public housing, delivering a net additional 1,000 public housing residences, and I think another net 19,000 private dwellings by the time it's completed.
Except we have talked about it now.
No, well, there you go.
That we can come back and talk about it more. Of course, that's caused some waves because people in those buildings did not know it was coming, and thinking back to when lockdowns happened out of the blue a couple of years back now. And the other one, another one, is the ability to, as of right, put a second dwelling on an existing lot, granny flats and the like. So that'll be an interesting one to watch as well.
Yeah, Vic Smart, a lot of those things are being revised. So lots of statutory planners will be hitting the books to understand what does this mean.
Yeah. All right. So we'll put some links in the show notes, but there's lots of information online about that, and there will be more, I'm sure, as people digest and understand the implications of this. Another one that hit the media this week, it was one of those Herald Sun sensational jobs that was picked up by 7 News and others, was councils applying waste charges, Tony. Nothing new, but of course, some of them have gone up to 18% in some cases. I think it was Moonee Valley, correct me if I'm wrong, that sort of topped the list in terms of the size of the rise. But as councils point out, the landfill levy has been increasing. The cost of dealing with waste has been increasing. The waste charge has never been under the rate cap, but the press is trying to make it look like it's some sneaky, underhanded thing that councils.
That's right. They're saying, you were circumventing the rate cap with these waste levy increases. But as you say, the state government's landfill levy doubled in 2020. It went up by 100% in 2020, which makes even Moonee Valley's 18% increase look like nothing, and that's the highest one in the sector this year, I think. So and as you say, councils are dealing with also this dwindling space in tips. Some councils with enormous costs around illegal dumping, up to $1 million a year in some councils to deal with that. And of course, a couple of years ago we had this ban from China on receiving recycling materials from offshore, and that's also fed into the problem. So there's some good reasons why these costs are rising, and it's not sort of council seeking sort of profit in one sort of area of its operations to subsidise some other area. It's simply covering the cost of providing waste services.
So that one's been getting some attention this week. A few councils and their advocacy work is getting some attention as well. I see a team from Greater Shepparton, including the Mayor, Shane Sarley, and Councillor Jeff Dobson have been to Canberra. This one's a bit of a sleeper, I think, Tony. The legislative changes that have been flagged for the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, Greater Shepparton is leading the charge, saying this is going to have significant impacts on the regions that rely on water, and the on-flow effect to the cost of fruit and vegetables could be quite dramatic in terms of the cost of living.
Yeah, it's the Water Amendment Restoring Our Rivers Bill 2023 that's being considered by the federal parliament. And the Greater Shepparton City Council have some great concerns about, the reducing access to water in that Goulburn region will the flow-on effects that will have in terms of, as you say, the cost of fruit and vegetables and the cost of the local community. So yes, a bit of a sleeper. I wasn't aware of the issue at all myself. Yeah,
so we'll keep an eye on that one. Greater Shepparton are certainly doing their bit to bring some attention to it. They've also this week made the decision to continue to advocate for a change of date for Australia Day, but they've made the decision to cease hosting and supporting Australia Day activities on the 26th of January from next year. And I contrast that with an announcement from Bayside this week. They are not going to change the way they're approaching Australia Day because the community response has been quite divided. There's support and there's support for going either way. So council's making slightly different decisions about the 26th of January now.
Yeah, and I think Bayside's decision is to say, look, we think this is a decision for the federal government. So they're not sort of saying what they think ought to happen. They're just simply saying it's a responsibility of the federal government to regarding what day is Australia Day celebrated. Their Reconciliation Action Plan Advisory Group did make a recommendation to council to request that council wrote to one of the local federal members asking them to move the Australia Day public holiday to another date. But council unanimously decided to affirm their commitment to practice and support Australia Day celebrations on the day that the federal government determined, currently January 26th. And as you say, there was a survey, and it was a pretty tight mixed view amongst the community, with a large proportion still undecided.
So council's still grappling with that one and undertaking consultation to reach an informed decision, which of course we applaud ultimately. Another story that caught my eye that I think is worth a read, Tony, is the ABC looked at local government-run airports around the country. We keep talking about wicked problems in the local government sector. Well, here's another one. Most of them, well, about 3/4 of the airports that are run by councils around the country are running at a loss and being subsidised by ratepayers. And those councils say the federal government particularly needs to put in more.
Yeah, that's right. So certainly there are airports, and an example given in there was the Ballarat Airport, and the Mayor Des Hudson at Ballarat was quoted. That's an airport that doesn't take commercial flights. It's owned and operated by the Ballarat City Council, and every year there's about a $200,000 subsidy that the community effectively pays through its rates to run that airport. But as the Mayor points out, although it's not receiving commercial flights, medical transfers to, emergencies to hospitals in Melbourne, bushfire fighting, aircraft, fertilising of farms with aircraft, all that is done from the Ballarat Aerodrome there. And there is value being delivered to the community. But there's significant investment in infrastructure required at that airport, and broadly speaking across airports in regional Australia, to be able to turn them into commercially viable facilities where commercial flights can land. I think $20 to $30 million to upgrade the Ballarat Airport to allow those commercial flights to land there. Now, if that occurred, then there may well be, a profit. There might be a profitable enterprise that the community wouldn't need to subsidise anymore. But currently, if you want to catch a plane to Sydney in Ballarat, you get in the car, drive to Tullamarine or Avalon, and you jump on the plane from there rather than, driving up the road to the local airport.
Good luck getting a flight to Sydney out of Avalon. I think you can fly to the Gold Coast, and that's about it.
Oh, is that it? Is it?
Yeah, at the moment. Yeah, I will stand corrected if that's updated in recent times. Check out that story on ABC. It's a real insight. 200 airports around the country that are run by councils, which shouldn't surprise in a country as vast and as geographically spread as ours is. So really important services that those communities get from those airports, which is obviously the argument as to why councils want to keep them going. And the only option they have, for the most part, is to subsidise with ratepayer funds. All right, Tony, you fancy a cup of tea or coffee? Want a little break?
Oh, yeah, be nice.
Yeah, okay, all right. Can you make me one while you're at it? Yeah, and we're going to bring in Julie Reid, who's in London and has filed this update report on her travels around the UK. Come in, Julie.
Hi, Chris. Hi, Tony, and our loyal listeners. I'm checking in today from Royal London. I'm so pleased to be back in England, and London is just my favourite place. So this is part 2 of my report back to TGU. You'll recall a few weeks ago I checked in from Bonnie, Scotland. Well, on my journey to Scotland, I was keen to find out about how local government is tracking post the intense COVID-19 pandemic period we all faced. So you'll recall that I met with Sarah Waters, and she has also introduced me to 2 of her colleagues, David Kennedy and Garrick Smith. They have been amazing. David and Garrick actually have shared with me some information about some of the innovative work going on in local government in Scotland. So, Chris, I'm excited about Angus Council, who became the first Scottish local authority to introduce a fixed 4-day working week for their waste and recycling services only a couple of years ago. So the new way of working has led to increased productivity, improved service performance, enhanced wellbeing of staff, and has delivered significant financial savings for the council. The more radical approach to working hours was developed through consultation with staff and trade unions after an original proposal to introduce shift working, with an element of either late evening or weekend working was strongly objected against. So the project is aligned with the wider Scottish Government commitment to consider the benefits and feasibility of a general shift to a 4-day working week, and provides a case study on how it can be implemented effectively in a frontline operational setting. So another project, Chris and Tony, that I came across through COSLA was an award that was given to West Dumbartonshire Council, who have delivered a district heating network and energy centre at Queen's Quay, Clydebank. So not only has it the development been a key element in the transformation of a former John Brown shipyard from an industrial landscape into a vibrant and diverse community, but it also sets out the council's commitment to transition towards a net zero future, a groundbreaking project which features Scotland's largest water source heat pump, which has been an installation that's taken part, and it's taking water from the nearby River Clyde and using it to generate heat, which is distributed to customers through an underground district heating pipe network. So the council established a wholly public-owned entity called West Dumbartonshire Energy, and that oversees the strategic development of the district heating network. Look, this was a very ambitious project for them, £20 million, which was supported by £6 million from the Low Carbon Infrastructure Transition Program. So another great project that is something that is something for this council to be really, really proud of. So some great projects, Chris and Tony, and really interesting to reflect on the innovations of councils, particularly the post the COVID environment. And the Scottish Government is really punching above its weight, Chris. I've been excited to see how much they've achieved in a very cash-constrained environment. So a very exciting time to be watching places like Scotland to see what local government does with their money. There's also a governance review being undertaken in Scotland, Chris, and I hope to report back more on that when I return to the sunny shores of Australia. Now moving on to Royal England, Chris. Well, because I'm in London, I'm looking at what's happening down here. This week, I've heard more about the situation in Birmingham. It's been reported in the Times this week that financial control over Birmingham City Council has been handed to the government, who have appointed commissioners after the city declared themselves bankrupt. So Michael Gove, the Levelling Up Secretary, said commissioners would be responsible for all functions associated with council governance in strategic decision-making and finances. And they are likely to look at selling some assets, including their library, their central library, and the museum and art gallery in an effort to balance the books. But just to remind you, Chris and Tony, that the council faced a shortfall of £87 million in 23-24 and forecast to have a shortfall of £164 million in 24-25. That's a lot of money to find. Now, the council blamed the shortfall on an equal pay ruling that has so far cost £1 billion and is facing further claims of up to £750 million. The council has also highlighted problems with its IT system, Chris, that cost as much as £100 million to fix. So there's a bit of a message there about make sure you get the IT system right in the first place. This is a real big challenge for councils. So the commissioners are required to prepare and agree on an improvement plan within 6 months. So it'll be interesting to see what they decide to do, whether they do sell those big assets. There's going to be a local inquiry to all of this, Chris, promised by the Commons and Michael Gove. They will look at options for Birmingham becoming sustainable into the future, as they state their residents deserve better, and we have heard that before. And in actual fact, Sean Davies, the chairman of the Local Governance Association, urged the government to come up with a longer-term plan to help other councils that are at risk. He's saying that local councils in England are facing a funding gap of £3 billion over the next 2 years. So an interesting story and one to watch. Now, another interesting story, Chris and Tony, comes out of the Evening Standard in London. Transport for London has a property firm which has been recently branded to be called Places for London. Now, this Transport for London property firm are delivering thousands of affordable homes across London. They've got enough land, including on tube station car parks, for 20,000 new homes. And its aim is to become one of the largest and most important property firms in London. It has already completed 800 homes on former car parks in and around train stations. It's always been something that I've wanted to see more in Melbourne. And, maybe we should be looking at some of these examples over here to see how they can succeed. It's a great use of land in what continues to be a challenging space to provide enough homes for the growing population. Now, my old stomping ground, the city of Westminster, I've visited there today, and I'm really pleased to say that they're working really hard to breathe new life back into Oxford Street. I noticed footfall is down and on what was the pandemic. So post-COVID, with the closure of some businesses, a number of American candy stores have actually set up and were linked to fake goods being seized. So the council wants them out. This has impacted on the image and the attraction of Oxford Street as an international shopping precinct. The council are offering small, innovative businesses rent-free shops on Oxford Street as part of their plan to boost the area and prevent more candy shops from opening up. They're encouraging new start businesses to showcase their innovative ideas. I think it's a great idea. And if they've got the shops to make available free of charge, then this is fantastic news for those businesses locally. So the City of Westminster has recently undertaken a consultation exercise, Chris, on a £90 million plan that aims to improve safety for people on foot in Oxford Street, as well as enhancing lighting, more green areas and seating. And this regeneration or rejuvenation is really on a grand scale, Chris. £90 million to invest. That's pretty impressive. Now, Chris and Tony, I'm very pleased to report that I was spotted today with Royals and the very, very important Royals that have recently been in the newspaper. So photo to come on that one. Very exciting news. It's very busy here, bustling with people from around the world, office workers flooding the tube. There's more noticeable flexible working also here, taking some pressure off the transport system, which is really good news. And according to my contacts at the City of London, working from home now is far more common than before COVID. So as a transport enthusiast, I was very excited to see more space on the tube, but also to ride the new Elizabeth line on the London Underground, which was a delight after many, many years of it being in development. So anyway, a lot of news from London. Chris and Tony, signing off now from Lively London. For now, Chris and Tony, I'm going to be back online with you direct in a couple of weeks. Have a great couple of weeks, everybody, and I'll see you really soon.
Well, I'm loving having this roving reporter over there in the UK. Time is ticking, though, Tony, as Julie's just about on her way back. But she makes it sound like she's been working really hard and gathering a lot of information. But I have some photographic evidence here that she's actually just been swanning about looking at the sites. Here she is, I think, in front of the Thames. Last week we saw her in Manchester. And of course, she's been up in Scotland. But she's doing a great job giving us those insights on what's happening in the UK. And it's a really interesting time to be there, Tony.
Look, if she hangs around the Royals much longer, she might come back as Dame Julie Reid, Chris. We might have to be calling her that. But I learned a lot there. Do we need a levelling up secretary in Australia, do you think? It's a nice
this levelling up thing, yeah, I don't know. As Julie said, there's been a bit happening in that space over there. There's a new levelling up minister as of last week. This whole plan to try and bring everyone up to the same level, etc. But I fear the council's going bankrupt, probably getting in the way of those aims. Birmingham being the big one, as Julie told us. Interesting, Tony, I was listening to some commentary on the Birmingham situation and the installation of commissioners. Those commissioners will come in and sit over the elected representatives. So unlike here, where you might get commissioners or administrators put in place of a council, the councillors will continue to function at Birmingham, as I understand it, but their decision-making will be checked by and overseen by those commissioners.
Very better model, I think, because it still provides for local democracy, but as you say, with that oversight and no doubt some constraints on their operation as a result.
Yeah. Interesting to hear Julie's thoughts on that Places for London initiative. She probably hasn't caught up with what's been announced here in the last few days and those priority precincts. I imagine there's going to be some similarities with the approach that Julie's been talking about in London in the government's suggested approach for our priority precincts. All right. Thank you, Julie. Julie will be back on the program, I think, in a couple of weeks. She'll be travelling back next week at the time we do TGU, but we've really enjoyed her reports from over there. One more story, perhaps, Tony, out of the US. We talked last week about some former councillors looking at jail time. Here's another. An ex-mayor in Anaheim in Los Angeles has been, he's actually pleaded guilty to a number of federal charges, a corruption scandal, and looks like doing potentially up to 14 months in jail.
Yeah, I saw that. Obstruction of justice, wire fraud, which always confuses me when I hear that word. I'm not quite sure what that means, but and lying to the federal investigators.
Wire fraud. Guilty. It's about transferring money with ill intent or something, isn't it? The wire fraud
guess
thing.
It is. Yeah, it's transferring funds. But yeah, Anaheim. Look, I just know it as the place the Rolling Stones went to, Chris.
Oh, I thought you were going to say you just know it as the home of Disneyland.
Oh, is that where it is? No, yeah. I know the Rolling Stones went to Anaheim at some point.
Well, there you go. That just shows you our slightly different
Stadium.
interests. Yes, that is where Disneyland is, and the Anaheim Angels baseball team, which are caught up a little bit in this story of Harry Sidhu, who stood down as mayor, I think last year, when the federal charges were brought and the investigation was on. But the FBI's got another one.
Yeah, they seem to be getting some minor politicians.
Yes.
Chris, watch this space.
I'm not sure which big fish you're thinking about, but I suspect I might know. All right, Tony, have you got a pick of the week for us this week?
No, I haven't, Chris. I've just been far too occupied,
with the housing statement.
With the housing statement last 2 days, but no, we'll.
I've got one for you there. Check your YouTube feed and have a look at the local leaders interview with Mark Dupay, the CEO of Borborshy Council, which
I actually
dropped on our
did
channel
watch that.
Oh, well, there you go.
I did watch that, and I learned some interesting things. I learned that Mark Dupay is one of the proteges, came through Catherine Dale at quite a number of councillors, of CEOs have worked under Catherine, and Catherine was the first CEO that I got to work with. I was can say I was the first in the first council that appointed her to the CEO role. She came from Boroondara to Nillumbik before she went to Bayside. So hi to Catherine. I know she watches occasionally. She's in New South Wales. Yeah.
And I think she might have retired just recently, has she not? I hope I haven't prematurely retired you there, Catherine, but I'm pretty sure I did hear that piece of news. I'm pleased you watched that and found something of interest in that. There's more to come from local leaders. We've got interviews coming in the next couple of weeks from Joseph Haweel, the mayor at Hume. I'm suspecting that might be fairly topical. Brett Davis, the CEO of Moyne, Carl Cowie, the CEO of Nillumbik Shire. There's an interesting character who doesn't just deign to appear on anyone's program, I've got to say, Tony. We've got a bit of a coup with Carl appearing very soon, and the Mayor of Melton, Lara Carley. So look out for those dropping in your queue very soon. All right, I think we might wrap it up. Another bumper week, and get that feedback in on the housing and planning reforms, and we'll cover as much of that as we can next week. Thanks, Tony. Have a great week.
Thanks, Chris.
Tony Raunic from Hunt & Hunt Lawyers, our sponsors here of TGU from VLGA Connect. Thank you for watching and listening, and we'll see you again soon.